She paid for first class. But they told her to move. They said her seat had been reassigned. They didn't know her name. They didn't know her power. What happens when a calm, poised black woman, a tech CEO with the power to pause a nation's airline system in seconds, is told she doesn't belong in the front of the plane? Would you stay silent? Would you switch seats? Or would you make the entire aviation industry stop and finally pay attention? This isn't a story about rage. It's about control. It's about what happens when dignity meets discrimination at 35,000 feet and doesn't back down. What was on her phone? Why did 12 planes suddenly halt within minutes? And who really owns the sky? This is the story of Dr. Celeste Vaughn. Seat 1A should have been hers, and by the end of this flight, it belonged to no one else. If you believe in justice, dignity, and quiet power that speaks volumes, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Now, buckle up. Let's take off. The soft announcement echoed through the Atlanta Skygate terminal, polished and robotic. Flight 248 to San Jose now board in all first-class passengers. Dr. Celeste Vaughn stood, collecting her leather folio, phone, and carry-on suitcase. Her steps were quiet but purposeful as she approached the boarding gate. Her posture was straight, her navy blue blazer pressed to perfection. The early afternoon sun poured through the terminal glass, catching the faint shimmer of her pearl earrings. She looked every bit the accomplished professional she was. And still, the moment she stepped forward into the first-class line, she felt the shift. The gate agent's eyes paused on her a beat too long. "Excuse me, ma'am," the woman said, lifting a hand as if to gently stop a tide. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again." Celeste held it up, polite and steady. "Certainly." The agent, whose name tag read Carmen Schultz, squinted at the digital pass on Celeste's phone, then frowned. This looks off. Give me a second." Celeste didn't move. She kept her expression neutral, even as a familiar tension started climbing up her spine. This wasn't new. It was just exhausting. Behind her, a white man in a Patagonia vest, AirPods in his ears, was waved through without a glance at his screen. Carmen tapped her keyboard, lips pursed. "I'm not seeing a first-class designation here. Maybe you were upgraded but didn't clear, no?" Celeste said calmly. "This seat was purchased directly, 3 weeks ago." Carmen tilted her head slightly, that patronizing smile creeping across her face. "Did you perhaps use rewards points? Sometimes those show up a bit funky in our system." Celeste inhaled softly through her nose and pulled up her email confirmation. It was a direct purchase. Full fare. Confirmation 5KD9LZ, under the name Dr. Celeste Vaughn. She also produced her ID, her Centurion card, and a business card for NovaTrace, the cybersecurity firm she had founded 8 years ago. Behind her, a young white couple laughed softly while holding hands. The woman bumped into Celeste's bag without apology and brushed past as Carmen, without a word, waved them forward. A chill passed through Celeste, not from embarrassment, but from the recognition that this was playing out the same way it had too many times before. Carmen picked up the phone and dialed, "Eli, I need a supervisor at Gate B9, possible ticket issue." Celeste folded her hands, phone still glowing with her boarding pass. Across the terminal, the monitors glowed with flight paths, smiling ads, and weather updates, but here, in this space between carpet and scanner, She was once again the anomaly. A question mark, not a first-class passenger, but a possible problem. Within moments, Eli Donnelly, a balding man in his 50s wearing a crisp navy vest, arrived with a quiet sigh like he'd been here before. What seems to be the issue, he asked. She says she bought a first-class ticket, but I'm not seeing that in the system. I'm standing right here, Celeste said, her voice firm but even, and I can confirm I did. Eli turned toward her. Ma'am, unfortunately, this doesn't appear to be valid for first class. I can check if there's a seat available in economy. I'm not asking for a favor, she replied. I'm asking for the seat I paid for. Eli crossed his arms. We see this sometimes passengers book in economy and trying to walk up to first class. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Celeste's grip tightened around the handle of her suitcase. Her voice remained soft, but her eyes were steady. It's not a misunderstanding. I've flown this airline dozens of times. This is the seat I bought. Passengers were now watching openly. 2 teenagers recorded the exchange on their phones. Carmen leaned in, voice lowered but sharp. Ma'am, if you continue to block the boarding lane, I'll have to call airport security. The weight of the moment settled in her chest. Celeste glanced at her watch. The flight was boarding. She had a 9 a.m. meeting with a panel of Federal Innovation Advisors the next morning. Missing this flight would mean losing a contract worth $320 million. She could fight, or she could fly. She made the decision quietly. Fine. Put me wherever you want. Just get me on that plane. Eli nodded quickly, relieved. We have a seat in 27B, middle row, rear cabin. Of course you do, Celeste murmured. He printed the new boarding pass and handed it to her without apology. Carmen's voice returned to cheerful as she turned to the next passengers in line. Celeste walked away from the gate with slow steps, aware of every eye that followed her. The reassigned seat felt like a scarlet letter pinned to her blazer. And yet, she didn't speak. Not here. Not yet. As she moved through the jet bridge, the scent of recycled air met her senses. She boarded without a smile. The first-class cabin sat ahead, glowing and generous with legroom, champagne, and soft leather seats. She had imagined reviewing notes there, maybe sipping green tea while adjusting final numbers in her slide deck. Instead, she was ushered down the narrow aisle, past curtain and rows of strangers, to the back of the plane, where the hum of the lavatory door punctuated the scent of disinfectant and fatigue. Seat 27B was between a man with elbows like cinder blocks and a teenager already asleep with headphones on. Celeste stowed her bag, sat down, and folded her blazer across her lap. She didn't cry, she didn't fume, but she did feel it. The dismissal, the ease with which they had chosen not to believe her. The way her degree from Stanford, her Ph.D. from MIT, her government contracts, her staff of 160 employees, none of it mattered here. Not against the soft suspicion that she didn't belong where she'd paid to be. Celeste closed her eyes and exhaled. They thought they'd seated her at the back of the plane, but they had no idea what she'd brought with her, and what she could still access from where she sat. The cabin air was cold and dry, humming with a low mechanical rhythm. The flight attendants moved with the kind of detached efficiency that comes from repetition. Each gesture practiced, each smile measured. Celeste sat between a man who immediately claimed both armrests and a teenage girl who hadn't looked up from her phone since boarding. The plane was still grounded but filling quickly. People hustled down the aisle, dragging roller bags, backpacks, and coffee cups with their names misspelled in permanent marker. No one paid attention to her. That was fine. She stared forward, hands resting on her folio like it might anchor her. She kept the screen of her phone off. There was nothing she needed to check right now. The truth was still waiting in her inbox. The 5217 receipt, the seat assignment 2A, the automated thank you for choosing Priority Fare Select. None of it had mattered. Celeste turned slightly and looked down the aisle, back toward the front cabin. Through the crack in the curtain, she could still see it. The overhead lights warmer, the seats wider. A different flight experience entirely, a different world, though just 10 feet away. She had been there before. Many times. Sat in 1A beside senators, diplomats, defense contractors, the occasional retired football player who looked surprised when she pulled out reading material they didn't understand. But they had never stopped her from entering. Not like today. She shifted her weight and tried not to flinch as her seatmate's elbow dug into her side. A flight attendant passed by. Male, mid-30s, square jaw. His name tag read Jared Holt. He wore a tight smile that never reached his eyes. He reached their row, paused, and nodded to the man in the aisle seat. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I get you settled with anything water A blanket?" The man grunted, pulling out his earbuds. "Whiskey, if you've got it." Jared chuckled. "That's for after takeoff, but I'll keep you first in line." Then, with a slight pivot, he turned to Celeste. "Ma'am, no eye contact, no smile. Just a word, dropped like punctuation." She raised an eyebrow. "Water, please." He nodded and walked away without another word. Celeste blinked slowly, letting her breath out. The small things always said the most. Tone, pace, where the eyes did or didn't go. You could learn everything about someone's respect for you and how they handed you a glass of water. A moment later, Jared returned, handed her a plastic cup filled halfway, then turned back to the man beside her with a friendly joke about turbulence. The man laughed and slapped Jared on the shoulder. The plane jolted slightly as the doors closed. A chime sounded. The pilot's voice crackled overhead with the usual details: cruising altitude, estimated arrival, clear skies over San Jose. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Celeste leaned her head back and let her eyes close. Not from fatigue, but to block out the world around her. Her body ached, her legs cramped already in the confined space. The man beside her had spread out like he was at home in a recliner, and yet it wasn't the physical discomfort that scraped at her. It was what couldn't be seen from outside, the growing pressure behind her ribs. Celeste remembered her first time flying first class. It was after she signed her first government contract, an NSA project on mobile encryption vulnerabilities. She was 29 and still getting mistaken for someone's assistant at every meeting. The moment she boarded that flight and turned left at the door instead of right, she'd felt it, the thrill. Yes, but also the surprise in the eyes of the man who had scanned her boarding pass. Like someone had handed her a key she wasn't meant to find. Since then, she'd learned to walk through these spaces with a deliberate calm. But today, that calm had been punctured, not because of one gate agent or one supervisor, but because of how easily the system snapped back into place to remind her that she didn't own that calm. She only rented it, and someone could revoke it at any moment. The captain announced takeoff. Engines roared. Celeste braced herself for the lift. The acceleration pressed her deeper into the seat. The plane rose steadily, angling toward altitude and routine. As the cabin stabilized, Jared returned, pushing the beverage cart. He handed drinks to passengers with exaggerated cheer, calling several by name. He didn't look at her until he was standing directly beside her row. Drink Celeste kept her voice steady. "Do you have sparkling water?" He glanced at the cart like it was a riddle. "We have regular, that's it. I'll take that then." He handed her a lukewarm bottle without a napkin and moved on. The girl beside her snickered softly. Celeste didn't turn her head. She reached for her phone, but stopped. Not yet. Instead, she opened her folio and flipped to the printout of her talking points for the Department of Innovation Roundtable. She had outlined 3 primary proposals: a predictive firewall system that identified cyber threats in real time, an international data-sharing protocol that preserved user anonymity, and an AI transparency audit that could flag bias in enterprise-level code. This meeting had the potential to double NovaTrace's revenue in a fiscal year, and all she could think about was how she was going to walk into that boardroom on no sleep and a sore back, still trying to shake the feeling of being less than. The cart rolled away. Jared laughed loudly in first class. She could hear it echoing over the curtain. Her mind drifted to Eli Donnelly, the supervisor at the gate. The way he had barely looked at her while telling her she must be mistaken. That familiar tone of maybe next time wrapped in the language of protocol. And Carmen, the gate agent, treating her identity as a clerical error. Celeste's jaw tightened. She could have fought harder, could have demanded a manager's manager, pulled up every receipt, called for legal support. But she knew how quickly that kind of resistance would have been labeled aggressive, difficult, problematic. She'd been in that role before, too. This wasn't weakness, it was calculation. She had chosen to board, but that didn't mean she had chosen to forget. From behind her blazer, she retrieved a thin black phone the size of a deck of cards. Not her usual mobile. This was her offline unit. Hardline encrypted, no apps, no voice assistant, no tracking. She slid her thumb over the back sensor. The screen flickered on with a faint pulse. NovaTrace OS. She hesitated. This wasn't about revenge. She had no interest in punishing hourly staff who'd never been trained to question their own biases. But the system was flawed. The behavior wasn't isolated. And if she had the tools to highlight that flaw, to press pause on a machine that moved too fast to notice who it stepped on, maybe she should. Her fingers hovered over the command line interface. Not yet. The plane jolted again as it hit a mild pocket of turbulence. Outside the window, clouds thickened into gray swells. Celeste looked down at the blank screen. Then she locked the device again and tucked it under her folio. Later, timing mattered, and when she moved, it would be with precision. Not impulse, not spite, strategy. Her father once told her that the difference between noise and signal was clarity of intent. She would wait, but not forever. The cabin lights dimmed overhead, casting everything in a pale amber wash. The plane cruised at 36,000 feet, somewhere over New Mexico. Outside the window, soft streaks of cloud drifted by like whispers Celeste couldn't hear. She sat quietly in her assigned middle seat, knees pressed against the back of the seat in front of her, arms folded tightly into her own space as the man beside her continued to sprawl without apology. He had removed his shoes and crossed one ankle over the other. She could smell the faint sourness of travel fatigue on him, a smell made sharper by the recycled air and the tightly sealed cabin. Celeste shifted, her back sore from the cramped posture. The girl beside her still hadn't spoken. Her earbuds remained in. A pop song leaked through just loud enough to be annoying. Across the aisle, a child dropped a toy with a shrill clatter and began to wail. She reached for her water, only to discover the cup empty. She pressed the call button gently. The light flicked on above her. No one came. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The light stayed on, pulsing like a question. Celeste tried to relax her shoulders, but the tension was coiled too tightly beneath her skin. She turned slightly and spotted Jared Holt further down the aisle. He was chatting with 2 passengers near the emergency exit row, leaning against the beverage cart like it was a cocktail bar. One of the women laughed at something he said and touched his elbow lightly. He never glanced in Celeste's direction. She exhaled and pressed the call button again. Still nothing. The girl beside her shifted in her seat, pulling her hoodie tighter over her head. The man on her other side reached for his soda and spilled a few drops on her slacks. He grunted an apology but didn't look up. Celeste dabbed the liquid off with a tissue from her purse. The stain was small, barely noticeable, but it was the symbol of something larger. Not malice, not violence, just disregard, indifference dressed in civility. After 15 minutes, Jared finally walked past her row. She stopped him gently with a raised hand. "I'm sorry. I requested water quite a while ago." He blinked like he hadn't noticed. "Oh, must have missed that. We've been busy." She looked down the aisle. No trays, no food, no emergencies. "I understand," she said softly, her tone wrapped in iron. "But I still need water." He nodded curtly. "I'll bring it." Then he walked away again. Celeste sat back, eyes closed. Her jaw ached from clenching. When the water arrived finally, it was another half-filled cup. Lukewarm, no ice, no napkin. Jared handed it to her without a word, then turned to the man beside her. "Hey, we've got extra peanuts up front if you want a second pack," he said with a wink. The man chuckled. "Don't tempt me." Celeste didn't say anything. She didn't trust herself to. Instead, she focused on her breath. She counted each inhale slowly. Let it fill her, settle her. The way her meditation coach had taught her after her first venture nearly collapsed. Breathe in 4 counts. Hold. Breathe out 6. Let go. The stillness gave her space to think, not just about this flight, but about all the times she had been asked to step aside, to explain herself twice, to smile through insult so she wouldn't be seen as a threat. This wasn't about rudeness. It was about patterns, invisible to most, but undeniable to those forced to walk them. Her mind returned to NovaTrace, her company, her people. When she had founded it, she had been one of the only black women leading a cybersecurity firm in the private defense sector. That hadn't come easily. Venture capital had ignored her. Media had overlooked her. Clients had underestimated her, until her system started doing what no others could. Detect threats before they activated, isolate malware before deployment, and most recently, interrupt multi-network communications without causing systemic failure. That last capability had been developed for high-risk diplomatic missions virtual sandboxes that let governments test responses to cyber attacks without risking real infrastructure. But Celeste had seen a different use, a cleaner use, a quiet one. She glanced at her encrypted phone again. Still off, still waiting. Not now. Her thumb brushed the corner of the device just once, like a whisper of a thought she hadn't yet spoken aloud. From the seat pocket in front of her, She pulled the in-flight magazine. She flipped past the advertisements and glossy pages until she reached the feature profile. It was about the airline's CEO, Greg Whitmore, a puff piece on legacy and leadership. There he was, smiling with arms folded, standing in front of a hangar. Celeste studied the photo. Greg Whitmore, white, mid-50s, legacy Ivy, the son of the airline's former CFO, promoted quickly through internal development programs that often skipped women and people of color entirely. He had once said in an interview that diversity matters, but culture fit matters more. Celeste had read that quote and remembered thinking, fit for whose culture, she closed the magazine and slipped it back into the seat pocket. Her neck hurt. She tilted it side to side. Her seatmate's elbow pushed harder into her rib. She shifted, but didn't say anything. A sudden jolt rocked the cabin. Moderate turbulence. The captain's voice followed immediately, calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting a bit of chop for the next 20 minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Jared moved swiftly now. He passed through the aisle collecting stray cups, securing carts. He reached their row and, for the first time, looked directly at Celeste. "You'll need to stow that," he said, pointing to her folio, which was already on her lap and zipped. "It is stowed," she replied. He opened his mouth, then closed it again and moved on. When the turbulence passed, the cabin quieted. Some passengers slept, others read, a few scrolled on their phones, mindless thumbs swiping. Celeste remained still, but her mind moved, not with rage, with clarity. What she had endured today wasn't new. It wasn't even unique. It was a single thread in a much larger fabric, one stitched by habit, by systems, by unchecked assumptions. And she wasn't angry for herself alone. She thought of her goddaughter, 21, studying computer science, already brilliant and already questioning whether she'd be taken seriously. She thought of the other black professionals she mentored who had stories like this and worse. She thought of what might change if this story didn't just fade like all the others. Her phone vibrated lightly. Not a call. Just a secure ping from NovaTrace servers, an automated system alerting her that remote access protocols were now available via satellite link. She looked down at it. 3 taps. That's all it would take to begin a process they wouldn't even notice until it echoed. Celeste didn't move, not yet, but the switch inside her had already flipped. The woman they had dismissed in row 27B. She had just decided to stop being polite. The hum of the engines had become a kind of background rhythm now, soothing in its consistency. The cabin was mostly quiet. A few passengers had dozed off with neck pillows awkwardly cradling their heads, while others scrolled through their phones or stared blankly at the seatback screens. A few rows ahead, a toddler's occasional squeal rose and fell like a wave, unbothered by turbulence or time zones. Celeste sat still in her seat, hands folded over her folio, eyes gazing straight ahead, but inside, a current was stirring. The stillness around her only amplified what moved inside. She had always been good at silence, at waiting. When she was a little girl, she used to sit on the stoop of her grandmother's house in Memphis, watching people walk by, studying the rhythm of how they moved, how they spoke. Her grandmother used to tell her, "You got a quiet fire, baby. That's the kind that burns the longest." Celeste had carried that fire through MIT classrooms where she'd been the only black woman, through tech incubators that confused her confidence for attitude, through boardrooms where people praised her insights while failing to look her in the eye, and now it was with her here. Row 27B, seat cramped, back aching, dismissed, forgotten, but far from powerless. She glanced again at the curtain separating economy from first class. It fluttered slightly with the movement of the flight attendants behind it, a boundary so thin, yet so powerful. She turned her gaze back to her lap. In the seat across the aisle, a man was staring at her, young, maybe late 20s, dressed in a casual gray blazer, laptop balanced on his knees. He looked thoughtful, not hostile. His eyes held recognition. He leaned slightly toward her when she caught his gaze. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Are you Dr. Celeste Vaughn?" She hesitated a beat. "Yes." He smiled, a bit sheepish. "I saw your talk at DEF CON last year on zero-day vulnerabilities and drone protocols. That was something else." Celeste gave a small nod, her voice calm. "Thank you. I work in defense infrastructure," he added quickly. "Not your level, of course, but I've been following your work. NovaTrace is kinda legendary in our space." Her lips curved slightly. "That's kind of you to say." A moment of silence passed. Then he tilted his head. "I have to ask, shouldn't you be in first class?" Celeste looked at him for a long moment. She thought about deflecting, about saying her seat had changed or that she preferred coach for some philosophical reason, but something in his face said he already knew. "I should be," she answered. He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening just slightly. "I thought so." He didn't press further, didn't make a show of sympathy, just turned back to his laptop, his brow furrowed with thought, but she could tell. The seed had been planted. People were watching, not enough to change the system, but enough to start questioning it. From further up the cabin, she saw Maya King, one of the junior flight attendants, walking back slowly with a tray. Her step had less confidence than the others. She looked maybe 24, warm brown skin, her hair pulled into a neat twist. There was something in her walk that felt like someone still figuring out how much space she was allowed to take up. Maya stopped at Celeste's row. "I'm doing a snack run," she said quietly. "Would you like anything?" Dr. Vaughn. The use of her name was deliberate, respectful. Celeste blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, thank you. Do you have almonds?" Maya nodded. "I'll check, and I'll bring water with ice." Their eyes met. In that one look, an entire unspoken conversation passed between them. "I see you. I see you too." When Maya returned with a small paper napkin and a handful of almonds, Celeste accepted them with a soft "thank you." She sipped the cold water slowly, letting it sit in her mouth a few seconds before swallowing. "Are you okay?" Maya asked quietly, lingering just a moment longer. Celeste didn't smile, but her voice was soft. "I will be." Maya gave a small nod and moved on. Celeste sat back, the napkin in her lap, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the tray table. She knew what she needed to do. Not to punish, to reveal. There was a difference. She had always believed that exposure, when done right, could be a form of accountability. Her work in cybersecurity wasn't about breaking systems. It was about identifying their blind spots before someone else exploited them. What happened to her wasn't just a service failure. It was a flaw in the algorithm of the culture itself, and flaws could be traced. She reached for her second phone again, the offline device. Its black matte surface reflected nothing, like obsidian in her palm. She unlocked it and launched a diagnostic interface. From here, through NovaTrace's backdoor channel, she could request a ping to the airline's public network just enough to identify communication nodes. Within seconds, a simplified interface displayed 12 active aircraft operating under the same fleet encryption signature. 12. That number sat with her. 12 planes. She thought of 12 other black women, or men, or young students who had boarded these aircraft with first-class tickets and walked away with the same bitter taste she carried now. Her fingers hovered over the code line. She could introduce a minor disruption, a delay, 3 minutes per plane, something internal, harmless to passengers, invisible to the public, enough to get attention, enough to force a look inward, not chaos, a pulse, a wake-up call. She hesitated. The part of her trained to weigh risk flickered to life. What if it was traced? What if it cost her? But another voice echoed. What if it changed something? She thought again of Maya, of the girl in the hoodie beside her, trying to disappear, of the dozen others whose stories would never trend, whose humiliation would be swallowed quietly between boarding groups and exit doors. Her hand steadied on the device. She typed a soft string of code, not a breach, not a disruption, not yet, just a scan. A soft echo through the airline system to trace how aircraft communications were distributed and segmented across their internal intranet. It wasn't intrusive. It was like gently knocking on a hallway wall to find where it was hollow. The response came back clean. No alarms, just the quiet acknowledgement of a system pinged by someone who knew its structure intimately. NovaTrace had helped design the beta communications layout of this airline 5 years ago. No one remembered that now, but Celeste did. She had the diagrams memorized like blueprints of a house she once lived in. She minimized the window and tucked the phone back into her folio. Still not time. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Her mind drifted back to the early days. The first time she had ever coded something no one else could crack. She was 16. Her high school computer science teacher, Mr. Lannon, told her the system was unbreakable. Celeste had smiled and nodded, then stayed up for 48 hours, fueled by orange soda and spite, until she had rewritten the security layer from scratch. Mr. Lannon hadn't looked her in the eye for the rest of the semester. That was the first time she learned the power of restraint. She hadn't gloated, she hadn't posted it, she had just known, and now, nearly 2 decades later, she felt the same sensation building again. The quiet certainty that the system wasn't as strong as it thought it was, that underneath all the rules and protocols and pleasant smiles lay a fragile foundation of assumptions, and she had the ability to shake it. She opened her eyes and glanced down the aisle. Jared walked past again, moving quickly, distracted by something happening in the front cabin, a commotion. One of the passengers was loudly complaining about their food preference not being honored. Celeste could hear snatches of phrases. "I fly this airline every week. I paid for first class for a reason. Do you know who I am?" She almost laughed. The irony was thick. People who lived their whole lives being treated like they belonged often unraveled the moment that certainty was questioned. Meanwhile, people like her had built entire worlds while being asked to prove themselves at every turn. A part of her wondered what would happen if she stood up now, walked to the front of the plane, held up her ID, her business card, her list of government contracts, told everyone exactly who she was. But what would that prove that she could shout they wouldn't hear her? Not really, but they might feel her. A few rows ahead, The man in the gray blazer, the one who had recognized her, looked back again. Just for a moment. Their eyes met. He didn't smile this time. He just nodded, like a quiet acknowledgement of something unspoken. Celeste returned the gesture. Across the aisle, the girl in the hoodie had dozed off, her cheek pressed to the window. A family nearby whispered among themselves in the Spanish, passing snacks from hand to hand. A baby giggled as her father bounced her gently on his knee. It was an ordinary flight, but Celeste knew how often ordinary moments held extraordinary truths. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about presence, making them see what they refused to look at. That a black woman in a tailored blazer might not be someone who doesn't look like she belongs in first class. She might be the person who built the technology that powers the cockpit. She might be the person holding the access keys to the very systems they trusted to keep them moving. And maybe, just maybe, she might be the person they would be forced to listen to, not because she demanded it, but because they no longer had a choice. Her phone pulsed once more. This time, the signal was different. A security handshake from NovaTrace's AI assistant, verifying a network response anomaly, a small inconsistency in the communication traffic from one of the planes in the fleet. It wasn't dangerous, but it was curious, like the system was already responding to her presence. Celeste smiled softly. The thing about quiet power was that most people didn't recognize it until it was already moving, until it had already shifted something permanent. She reached for her water again, took a slow sip, then placed the cup carefully on her tray. The curtain to first class rustled slightly in the draft. The seatbelt sign chimed off, and still, no one in the front of the plane knew they had already lost control of the narrative. It hadn't made the news yet, but it would, very soon. At 37,000 feet, the sky turned from pale to a deep cobalt blue, and outside Celeste's window, the sun began its slow descent behind layers of cloud cover. The passengers around her adjusted their recline angles, shifted in their seats, and prepared for the long coast into California. Most of them had already forgotten the gate, forgotten the way she had been stopped, questioned, shifted, but she hadn't. Some things you learn to carry longer than others. She reached into the side pocket of her blazer and retrieved a single black earbud. It connected automatically to her encrypted phone. A barely perceptible vibration in her palm, letting her know the network bridge was complete. She slipped the bud into her ear and tapped twice. NovaTrace Voice Authorization. Vaughn 075 Alpha. A chime acknowledged her credentials. The AI assistant spoke in her own custom-selected tone, a neutral, calm American voice. Familiar, but not comforting. Just competent. Just enough. Welcome, Dr. Vaughn. Secure sandbox activated. Remote infrastructure access ready. Celeste tapped her screen and brought up a simplified, wireframe display of the airline's communication grid. To an outsider, it would look like abstract art, a floating network of nodal points connected by thin lines that pulsed faintly in motion. To her, it was a living map, 12 aircraft, each node a flight number, each connected to a private comms hub through the airline's internal API layer. Most cybersecurity professionals never touched this level of access. She had helped build it. Not this exact implementation, but the architectural logic that made this network so seamless. She remembered the meetings, the early development calls, the heated debates over bandwidth priorities and security thresholds. They hadn't known then what they were really designing. She always had. It was never just about stopping bad actors. It was about proving who had the right to command silence and who had the right to break it. Celeste selected the node assigned to her flight. It blinked once in acknowledgement. A cascade of diagnostic data flowed onto the screen. Ping latency, signal distribution, channel utilization, all steady. She wasn't here to break the system. Not yet. She was here to remind it that she existed. With a single line of code, she created a signal echo, an invisible ripple that would bounce through the internal system without logging as a threat. It would delay the system's next scheduled ping to the airline's mainframe by 45 seconds. A blip. Nothing more. It was enough. As the command executed, Celeste looked up and out the window, her face still and unreadable. Below them, the land was beginning to glow in patches. City lights flickering on beneath the haze of dusk. Cars like tiny veins of movement, connecting places she didn't need to visit. Beside her, the girl in the hoodie had finally removed her earbuds. She glanced over and met Celeste's eyes. "You okay?" Celeste nodded slowly. "Just thinking." The girl shrugged. "You look like you're about to fix something that doesn't want to be fixed." Celeste gave a soft laugh. "It wasn't far off. I guess I am." The girl leaned her head back again. "Good luck with that." Jared Holt passed again, now slower, the smooth glide of his earlier confidence replaced by slight tension. He paused near their row, checking the overhead bins, pretending to straighten a latch that didn't need straightening. He glanced down and saw Celeste watching him. She didn't look away. Neither did he, but he didn't say anything either. He just turned and continued forward, his shoulders just a little stiffer. Celeste returned to her phone screen. Node after node blinked back steady data. She selected a second aircraft at random, Flight 902 from Phoenix to Seattle. She repeated the command. A small ripple, a timed pause, invisible, untraceable. She did it again. A third flight, a fourth. Each action was deliberate, each measured. 12 planes in the air, each relying on a comm system that had never considered the possibility of ethical interference. She wasn't shutting anything down, not rerouting, not scrambling, just whispering into the wires that someone was watching. Someone who had earned her seat and wouldn't be forgotten again. The headphone in her ear vibrated softly with the next phase of diagnostic. All nodes stable. 4 echo pulses confirmed. 3 timing irregularities detected on ground communication sync. Perfect. Just enough to trigger questions. Celeste muted the interface and sat back. The seat was still tight, her body still cramped. But something had changed. She wasn't just enduring the discomfort. She was rewriting what it meant. She looked down the aisle toward first class again. The curtain was open now, slightly. A few passengers were standing, stretching their legs. A man in a gray business suit, silver cufflinks glinting, turned toward a flight attendant and asked for another scotch. Celeste recognized him. She'd seen him on a panel once in D.C., a procurement official who had talked over her repeatedly, then asked if she had a background in human resources. He didn't see her now. He hadn't seen her then. She smiled to herself, a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. There would be no public display, no angry video, no confrontation uploaded for clicks. This wasn't theater. It was signal. Back in her seat, the young man who had recognized her earlier leaned toward her slightly. "Is it just me?" he whispered. Or is something weird going on with the onboard messaging system? My Wi-Fi dropped for like 10 minutes. Celeste tilted her head. Must be turbulence, she said. He raised an eyebrow, as if he knew better, but didn't push. You ever get tired, he asked softly, of being the smartest person in every room, and still treated like you shouldn't be there? Celeste considered the question. I don't get tired of being smart, she replied. I get tired of proving it matters. He nodded slowly, then turned back to his screen. Celeste's fingers hovered over her phone one last time. There were 8 flights left untouched. For now. The plane shook gently again as it began its descent pattern. Outside, the sky had turned a deeper violet, stars barely beginning to peek through the thin clouds. Her display dimmed, but her system stayed live in the background, her commands queued, her tools ready. Jared walked past again, eyes darting left and right. This time, he looked uneasy. Good. Let the system feel uncertainty for once. Let it feel what she had felt for years. The absence of assumption, the absence of ease, the presence of someone who didn't need permission to be powerful. Celeste reached for her cup again, took the last sip of water, and whispered beneath her breath, "Let's see who's paying attention." The cabin lights dimmed again as the flight entered its final third. That in-between stretch where exhaustion started to creep in, but arrival still felt distant. People reclined further, sighed deeper, and adjusted themselves into postures of survival more than comfort. The overhead bins rattled softly as air currents nudged the aircraft. Flight 218 to San Jose was flying smooth on the outside, but something subtle had begun to shift within. Celeste checked the time, 7:09 p.m. Pacific. Her interface pulsed once, diagnostic phase complete. The encrypted system displayed the latest network status. All 12 aircraft under the airline's flagship fleet were accounted for. Everything within normal tolerance levels, except for a growing ripple, a brief delay in synchronization packets across the secondary broadcast band. In technical terms, it was a blink. In operational terms, it was a whisper in the ear of a giant. She tapped into Node 5. Flight 902, Phoenix to Seattle. A deep breath. Execute ComEcho 3. The screen responded instantly. Local delay active. Non-essential communication temporarily suspended. All public-facing systems nominal. In plain English, no Wi-Fi, no cockpit messaging, no cabin updates, no entertainment sync. Exactly 3 minutes. Celeste leaned back. She didn't touch anything else. She didn't need to. The disruption would self-correct. The comms resuming without any logs visible to the casual IT audit. But she knew the crew would notice. The systems were too smart not to flag the delay internally. A few lines of garbled script, a timeout window where nothing moved forward. Then, like magic, it would all return. Just long enough to make them nervous. The question wasn't whether they'd find the source. The question was whether they'd understand the message. She repeated the process with Flight 843 from Denver, then again with Flight 306 out of Chicago. Each activation sent a silent message across the airwaves. Not anger, not threat, awareness. 1 minute passed. 2, on board her own flight. Celeste glanced around. Jared had returned from the galley with furrowed brows and tight shoulders. He paused halfway through the aisle, fiddling with his handheld terminal. She watched as he pressed several commands and stared at the screen. Confused, he pressed again. Still nothing. Then he walked briskly toward the front cabin. Maya King returned moments later, moving more deliberately than earlier, her eyes scanning the rows. She approached Celeste's seat, crouched slightly so as not to disturb the girl in the hoodie beside her. "Is everything all right?" she asked quietly, her voice low enough not to carry. Celeste nodded, then tilted her head. "Why do you ask?" Maya hesitated. "The crew system just glitched. All the service preferences disappeared and the inventory resync failed. We haven't seen that before." Celeste didn't answer right away. Her eyes met Maya's, steady and calm. "If the system stopped responding," she said softly, "what would you do?" Maya looked startled by the question, but thoughtful. "Run a reset, reboot the module, call the flight deck if needed." And if it happened across more than one plane, Maya blinked. "Is it happening across more than one plane?" Celeste gave the faintest smile. Not confirmation, not denial, just presence. Maya's voice dropped further. "Whatever's going on, the flight deck's nervous. They're saying it's probably just a network buffer issue, but they're watching closely. There's an IT memo from ground ops looping through the staff inboxes." Celeste tilted her head. Already, Maya straightened, glanced around the cabin, then leaned in again. Are you trying to prove a point?" Celeste looked past her, toward the drawn curtain of first class. "I already proved it." Maya stood back up and gave a slow nod, her lips tight with some mix of worry and admiration. "I'll keep my head down," she whispered, then turned and walked away. Celeste's system buzzed softly. 3 minutes had passed. Communications restored. Wi-Fi back online. Passenger chat enabled. From across the aisle, the young man who'd recognized her from DEF CON glanced at his screen and frowned. Then looked at her. "Okay," he said under his breath. "Now I know that's not turbulence." Celeste didn't deny it. She just closed her display and let the silence stretch between them. From the front of the plane, Jared reappeared, looking flustered. "We've experienced a brief system inconsistency," he said flatly, speaking to no one in particular. "It's being looked into. All services should resume shortly." Celeste could almost hear the press release forming in his throat. She opened her phone again, this time accessing the anonymous mail server NovaTrace used for secure communication. She composed a message addressed directly to Rena Calderon, the airline's chief operating officer. The address wasn't public, but Celeste had retrieved it years ago during a joint innovation pitch. She never used it, until now. Subject echoes message, body 12 planes, 3 minutes each. One message. You built a system designed to exclude while pretending to welcome. That's not just a customer experience problem. It's a pattern. I didn't shut down your airline. I just tapped it on the shoulder. If you want to prevent further disruption, meet the moment. You have 72 hours to acknowledge your system's failure and publicly commit to operational change. You know what that means. You know what's needed. Don't miss the opportunity to fix it from within. No name, no threat, just the truth. She hit send. The message bounced through proxies around the globe. Impossible to trace. It would arrive in Rena Calderon's inbox marked only by a soft ping and a blinking red flag. Whether she opened it was irrelevant. It would spread, because disruption has gravity. The man in 27C beside her had fallen asleep again, head tilted back, mouth slightly open. Celeste rested her hands on her lap, closed her eyes, and breathed. Not in rage, not in triumph, in clarity. She wasn't trying to be seen anymore. She had already made herself undeniable, and the skies above them, they weren't so quiet anymore. The hush in the cabin was deceptive. On the surface, everything had returned to normal. Wi-Fi restored, cabin lights dimmed to evening glow, passengers scrolling their phones or settling into half-sleep. But beneath it all, something had shifted, a ripple that couldn't be seen, only felt. Celeste didn't need to move. Her work was done for now. The command she had executed still resonated invisibly through the airline's infrastructure, and the right people were beginning to pay attention. Across the aisle, the young man from earlier leaned closer again, his voice low, measured. That was deliberate, all of it. Celeste didn't reply. He smiled, but it wasn't a playful smile. It held understanding. "Thank you," he said. She turned to look at him fully. For what? For reminding them we're not all asleep. Up front, behind the closed curtain to first class, a different kind of energy was unfolding. She could sense it. Tense murmurs, flight staff whispering about sync errors and manual override, the kind of uncertainty that eats away at even the most polished protocol. Maya returned to Celeste's row with a steady pace, but her eyes carried a question. "They locked the crew's communication system," she whispered. "No more auto-sync. Everything's going through Flight Ops manual review now." Celeste raised an eyebrow. That was fast. "They're nervous. The captain just made a call down to ground control himself. And you." Maya tilted her head thoughtfully. "I've worked enough flights to know when the system's scared. I'm not scared of you. Why not? Because you're not trying to crash the plane. You're trying to land the truth." Celeste paused. That line caught her off guard, not just because it was poetic, but because it was true. She reached into her blazer and pulled out a thin, black mat card, just her initials embossed, barely visible under light. She placed it in Maya's palm. "If anyone asks, you didn't see me." Maya slid the card into her apron and nodded without a word. Moments later, a small alert pinged on Celeste's secondary phone. Incoming message. It wasn't from the airline, not directly. Sender E.R. Only one person used that signature, Eli Ramsey, her former co-founder, the architect of NovaTrace's early network structures. He hadn't messaged her in months, not since the fallout, not since the press had tried to paint her as over-controlling, and he'd stepped back into the shadows to let her take the public brunt. She tapped to open the message. "Celeste. They're talking already. DHS is looped in. So is legal. I'm assuming this is your work. If so, elegant as hell. Call me before they spin this beyond your reach. You still have leverage. Don't burn it all. Eli." She stared at the message for a long moment. No greeting, no apology, just clarity, and a warning. She didn't respond. Not yet. A second message appeared, this one from a different server marked with encryption only NovaTrace's original core could recognize. This time, it was from Rena Calderon, the COO. Subject line, none. Message, we received it. 3 words. That was all. Celeste smiled faintly. It had landed. The message, the point, the presence. She had become undeniable. She powered off the device and let it rest in her lap. The storm she had triggered was growing on the ground, quiet now, but inevitable. Behind her, a light tap on her shoulder. She turned to find the girl in the oversized hoodie looking curious. "Hey, sorry," the girl said, "but are you someone?" Celeste blinked, caught off guard. "Aren't we all?" The girl laughed. "No, I mean, like someone important." Celeste considered it, then said calmly, "I'm someone who doesn't like to be erased." The girl nodded like that made more sense than any title or company ever could. "Cool," she said. Celeste nodded. "Cool." As the girl leaned back into her seat, Celeste turned her gaze toward the window. Below, the lights of the western coastline glimmered in the twilight. Above, the plane moved forward like nothing had changed, but everything had. The airline systems had hiccuped. The crew had shifted from confidence to calculation. Executives had been alerted. A COO had responded. A former ally had resurfaced. And still, she sat in economy, legs cramped, ignored by a cabin that had dismissed her the moment she didn't fit their assumptions. But now she was no longer just the woman who'd been turned away at the gate. She was the storm outside the radar, and soon they would see her for what she was. Not a problem, a reckoning. Celeste sat still, fingers folded over the armrest, but her mind was anything but quiet. The silence she'd initiated wasn't just technical, it was philosophical. Systems were pausing. Yes, but so were assumptions. So were biases. So were the default scripts that played out in cabins like this one every single day. A flight attendant telling a black woman she was in the wrong seat. An executive assuming she was a consultant, not a founder. A seatmate asking what she did for a living, as if trying to place her worth in relation to their own comfort. Every micro-interaction added up to a macro narrative, one where people like her were supposed to be invisible and less exceptional, and even then, doubted. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a warning or a message of concern, it was a request. From inside the airline's internal messaging system, unencrypted, subject systems degraded. Any insight? No greeting, no signature, but the source. She traced it to an IP at the airline's data hub in San Mateo. Interesting. They were reaching out, not to accuse, but to ask. She smiled to herself. That was the shift she'd been waiting for. Not punishment, not scandal. Recognition, a subtle, reluctant acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they didn't understand the architecture as well as she did. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she tapped back into NovaTrace's console and issued one more soft command. No disruption this time, just a signal. A single packet sent to each plane in the flagship fleet. When decoded, it displayed a message that could only be read by the systems administrator on each aircraft's back-end dashboard. It said, "Who built your safety?" A question, nothing more, but a question in the right place is often louder than a siren. Celeste slid the phone back into her blazer pocket. Her seatmate had fallen asleep again. The young girl in the hoodie was sketching in a notebook with faint pencil marks, her earbuds back in. The world spun quietly around her. She exhaled through her nose and thought about the years she'd spent building safety systems for people who would never see her. Pilots who took off and landed because of code she'd written. Control centers that relied on back-end security she had designed, patched, secured, planes that could fly because she existed. And yet, they hadn't saved her a seat. Across the aisle, the young man, Dev, she'd overheard, tilted his head. "You just sent another one, didn't you?" Celeste didn't reply. He smiled. "I hope they're sweating." She looked at him for a long beat, her voice soft. "That's not the goal. Then what is?" She folded her hands again. "Reflection and reform." He nodded slowly. "You think they'll actually change?" Celeste gave a tiny shrug. "People rarely change from shame, but systems can. When they're exposed enough, when staying the same becomes more dangerous than evolving. Dev leaned back, visibly impressed. You should teach, or write a book. I do both. But nobody buys books written by women like me unless there's a trauma arc attached. He didn't laugh. He understood. Up near the cockpit, a second flight attendant entered the cabin and made a direct path toward Celeste's row. Not Jared, someone else. A woman in her 40s with a badge that read Supervisor. "Ma'am," she said, voice clipped but polite. "May I have a word?" Celeste gestured slightly. "We're already having one." The supervisor didn't smile. "We've had a few technical issues with our network, some unusual patterns. I'm asking if you've seen anything strange on your device." Celeste looked directly at her. Strange how connection delays, unusual permissions, anything out of the ordinary. She thought about lying, then didn't. "I've seen a few things," she said calmly. "Would you be willing to let us review your device, just for routine integrity check?" Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking anyone else on board to do the same?" The woman's eyes flickered. "No." "Then the answer is no." The woman nodded curtly, masking her tension behind customer service decorum. "If anything changes, please let us know." She turned and walked off without waiting for a response. Celeste reached slowly into her jacket and opened the folio once more. She tapped into a private app she rarely used. It was called Mirror, a self-auditing tool that mapped the behavioral impact of technical interventions in real time. It didn't just track network activity, it tracked social ripples, conversations sparked, messages forwarded, decision trees forming among executives who were now watching, unsure what was next. The nodes blinked slowly on her screen, a cascade of quiet change. Somewhere in a headquarters in San Mateo, a whiteboard was being filled with scribbled theories and threat maps. Somewhere in a press room in New York, a junior PR specialist had started drafting 3 possible statements: apology, denial, compromise, and somewhere in a boardroom, a CEO had just asked, "Who the hell is Celeste Vaughn?" And the answer didn't fit neatly in their systems. She was a founder, a code architect, a philanthropist, a board member, a black woman in row 28C with her knees touching the seat in front of her. And, for the first time, they were paying attention, not because she demanded it, but because her presence had become the most pressing issue in their sky. A notification buzzed across her screen. The COO again. Rena. This time, it was a single sentence. "Would you take a call?" Celeste closed her eyes, then typed one word back. No, she didn't need a phone call. They'd hear her just fine. At 36,000 feet, even silence has weight. Celeste sat motionless, the same way she did before making an important decision in a boardroom, back straight. Hands resting gently, breath controlled, every muscle relaxed, yet every neuron primed. The tension in the cabin wasn't loud anymore. It had become something more insidious, a nervous anticipation, as if everyone could sense a presence but couldn't name it. The screen on her device dimmed. She hadn't touched it in several minutes. She didn't need to anymore. The message had taken root. Up front, beyond the curtain separating business and economy, a second curtain had been drawn between the cockpit and the rest of the plane. Most passengers never noticed it, but Celeste did. She saw how the co-pilot leaned in a little longer than usual when speaking to the captain, how the intercom remained unused for the past 20 minutes, how Jared walked briskly now, eyes darting from his tablet to the passenger manifest. There was a digital trail left behind, and they were chasing it. They just hadn't realized yet that the trail didn't lead to a threat. It led to a mirror. On the cockpit control panel, the display flickered for the briefest moment a status update, one that only the pilot and co-pilot would see. It read, "System status observed." That wasn't from the airline. It wasn't from their IT department. It was Celeste's final test, not a shutdown, not an attack, just a reminder you are not alone in this sky. Meanwhile, Maya King stood near the lavatory, speaking in hushed tones to another flight attendant. Her hands were steady, but her shoulders tense. She glanced back toward Celeste, eyes searching for something approval, maybe, or courage. When their eyes met, Maya stepped forward. "They're trying to figure out who you are," she said softly. "Jared thinks you're an inspector from the FAA, or maybe FBI. He's getting paranoid." "I'm neither," Celeste replied. "I figured," Maya said. "You don't move like someone trying to catch people. You move like someone waiting for them to catch up." Celeste offered the faintest smile. "They're a bit behind. Just a bit," Maya whispered, trying not to smile. "They've issued a silent notification to the flight crew. They called it Level 2 Behavioral Watch." Celeste laughed under her breath. "That's for suspicious passengers," she said. Maya nodded. "I know. Thing is, I don't think they know what to do when someone's suspicious, but also completely composed." Celeste leaned in slightly. "That's the whole game, isn't it? They want people to shout, to be loud, to act out. Then they can dismiss it, file it under aggression, but calm. Calm gets under their skin. They're watching you," Maya said. "I know," Celeste replied. "Let them." She handed Maya a small folded slip of paper. It looked innocuous, harmless. Maya accepted it with both hands. "What is this?" she asked. "A guide, in case someone actually wants to fix something after I leave this plane." Maya tucked it into her pocket without looking. From the intercom, the captain's voice came through for the first time in nearly half an hour. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our gradual descent into the Bay Area. Weather in San Jose is clear. We ask that you begin securing your belongings and return to your seats. Thank you for flying with us." The usual script, but Celeste could hear it. The slight edge in his voice, the pacing too slow, too careful. They knew something was happening, they just didn't know what. And that was the point. Celeste turned to her window. The clouds were thinning. The light below turned from deep blue to gold as they crossed into the final stretch of daylight. Her reflection in the window startled her. For a second, she saw herself not as she felt, but as the world had seen her for so long, an outsider. An anomaly. Too educated, too calm, too much. Too much for a system that only made room for her if she was either silent or extraordinary. And yet, here she was, simply present, and the system was bending. She thought back to the early days of NovaTrace, to sitting in server rooms in borrowed chairs, routing prototype security layers through junk code. Nights with Eli arguing over open-source philosophy and closed-loop encryption. The time she was told by an investor that she was not the face he imagined for tech leadership. "You're more the voice behind the curtain," he'd said. But today she was both. She was the hand behind the curtain and the voice echoing through the cabin. She turned from the window and caught sight of Jared again. This time, he approached directly. "Ma'am," he said, more politely than before. "I wanted to personally apologize if anything earlier came off as uncomfortable." Celeste looked at him. "I don't need comfort," she replied. "I need accountability." He cleared his throat. "Of course, I understand. The airline takes guest experience very seriously." She raised an eyebrow. "I'm not a guest. I'm a paying customer. Don't reframe exclusion as hospitality." He faltered. Celeste leaned in slightly. "You ever wonder what would happen if the people you overlooked controlled the sky you flew in?" Jared stared at her, caught between defensiveness and fear. "Have a safe landing," she said, then turned back to her tray table. Jared walked away without another word. The plane began to descend. Outside, the patchwork of cities and roads below turned amber in the fading light. Celeste powered down her device, letting the system enter sleep mode. She'd already queued one final file for dispatch once they touched ground. It would land in the inboxes of the airline's board of directors, government regulators, and selected media outlets. A full technical audit, not of their software, of their culture, a nudge, yes, but a firm one. The seatbelt sign dinged, the cabin grew still, and Celeste, eyes closed, listened to the quiet before landing, not as the end of a journey, but as the moment the ground rises up to meet you. The wheels touched down with a slight jolt, a muted reminder that even the most controlled descents come with impact. Flight 218 rolled down the runway under an orange sky, the tarmac stretching out like a promise or a confrontation. Inside the cabin, no one clapped. It wasn't that kind of flight, the kind of uneventful where passengers feel safe. This was different. Everyone seemed more alert, like they sensed something had happened even if they couldn't name it. Celeste kept her eyes closed a moment longer, breathing through the low rumble of the plane slowing down. The cabin lights flickered once as systems shifted into landing mode. Another soft sound from overhead, a collective exhale across the seats, the quiet shuffle of passengers pulling jackets from overhead bins. But she remained still. In row 28C. Dr. Celeste Vaughn didn't feel like she had landed. She felt like something had risen to meet her. "Welcome to San Jose," the captain announced, his voice even flatter than before. "Local time is 6:47 a.m. We ask that all passengers remain seated with seatbelts fastened until the aircraft comes to a complete stop and the captain turns off the seatbelt sign. On behalf of our entire crew, we thank you for flying with us today." The irony of that last line didn't escape her. A flight they hadn't wanted her on, a seat they had tried to deny her, a presence they still hadn't fully processed. She opened her eyes and looked out the window as the aircraft taxied slowly. The terminal loomed into view, glass and steel bathed in golden hour light, and just beyond the edge of the gate, two vehicles idled, one marked with airline ground ops, the other unmarked, black windows, tinted enough to shield anyone inside. They were waiting. Celeste's lips curved slightly. She reached into her blazer pocket and removed the thumb-sized black transmitter she had carried for 3 years. Not for sabotage, not for retaliation, but for exactly this moment. One soft tap would release the final data capsule. She didn't press it yet. Instead, she waited as the plane came to a complete stop. The seatbelt sign turned off with its usual ding, and the cabin erupted into organized chaos. Passengers stood too quickly. Overhead bins opened with audible thuds. Tired arms reached for carry-ons, elbows bumped, whispered apologies exchanged. The girl in the hoodie turned to Celeste. "You should go first," she said, eyes wide now with awareness. Celeste shook her head. I'll be the last one off." The girl hesitated. You're not in trouble, right?" "No," Celeste replied, "but some systems are." As the cabin emptied, Maya made her way back from the galley, stepping lightly, her apron removed, now in her own coat. She stopped by Celeste's seat. "They're waiting outside," Maya said, barely above a whisper. "I know. I can stall them if you want." "No," Celeste said gently. "I want them to see me. Fully." Maya nodded. "What happens now?" Celeste looked at her, eyes calm. "What always happens. The system resists. Then it breaks. Then it rebuilds. You think they'll change? I think they'll have no choice." Maya looked down, pulled something from her pocket, the card Celeste had given her earlier, and placed it back into Celeste's hand. "Keep it," Maya said. "I already know your name now, and I'll remember what you did here." Celeste didn't argue. She accepted the gesture with a slow nod. Dev passed by next, dragging a canvas duffel over his shoulder. He paused, offering her a single fist to bump. "I'll be watching for the fallout," he said. Celeste bumped his fist gently. "Watch with purpose," she replied, "not just curiosity." And then, at last, the aisle cleared. The flight attendant at the front, Jared, stood by the exit, his professional smile carefully reassembled. But his eyes betrayed something more complicated now. Not fear exactly, not respect either. Recognition. She approached slowly, her leather folio tucked under one arm, heels clicking softly against the floor. As she reached the exit, Jared stepped aside, holding out a hand as if to assist her. "I've got it," Celeste said calmly. She stepped onto the jet bridge without looking back. The cool air of the terminal hit her skin like the reset of a scene. 2 men waited by the gate. One wore a blazer and lanyard, airline security. The other wore a charcoal gray suit, no name tag, and a tablet in hand. They didn't block her path, but they flanked it. "Dr. Vaughn," said the man with the blazer. She paused. "Have we met?" "No," he said, "but we've been briefed. Our COO would like to request a private debriefing. She's available by secure line or in person if you're willing." "Willing," Celeste repeated. Interest in word choice. The man didn't blink. "We're aware that you've accessed and interacted with several of our flight systems. We're also aware no passengers or operations were harmed. Still, we'd like to understand the purpose behind your actions." Celeste glanced down at the transmitter in her hand, then back up. "My purpose," she said slowly, "was to see whether your system could detect its own flaws before someone had to scream for help." The man in the suit stepped forward. "You made your point, Dr. Vaughn." She smiled. "That wasn't the point." With a tap of her thumb, the transmitter sent its final signal, a full report package uploaded to the cloud, encrypted, time-stamped, accessible only by the top 15 stakeholders in the airline's corporate chain. Inside it, logs, footage, internal message loops, and a detailed ethical audit of passenger treatment protocols. The man in the suit's tablet blinked. He looked down, then sharply at her. "You've just delivered a formal disclosure to our board." Celeste nodded. "You'll want to be in the room when they read it." The man with the blazer swallowed hard. "Are you willing to speak on record about what you experienced on this flight?" Celeste took a step forward. "I'm willing," she said, "to be heard, but not on your terms." She walked past them into the terminal. People bustled around with luggage, kids, coffee cups. Another flight was being announced over the loudspeaker. Life moving on. unaware that a woman with calm eyes and a sealed folio had just shifted the internal map of an entire airline, and maybe, if they listened, of an entire industry. Celeste stepped into the private business arrivals lounge, the kind of sterile glass space that muffled ambition in velvet and silence. This was not a place for chaos. It was a place for polished conversations, untouched by baggage carts or boarding calls. She sat near a wall of tinted windows, her folio beside her, and reached for a pen. Not her phone, not a sleek touchscreen, a pen and a blank piece of paper. On it, she began writing names, not for revenge, for clarity. She listed the people who would attempt to erase what just happened, spin it into misunderstanding, soften the facts until they resembled fiction. She listed the names of those who had power but lacked sight, and she wrote one name in all caps, Rena Calderon. She underlined it. 5 years ago, they had met by accident at a tech philanthropy auction in Palo Alto. Most people in the room had ignored her. Rena hadn't. She had asked her, plainly and without performance. What happens when the systems we build begin to define the humans they are supposed to serve? Celeste had never forgotten that. A soft click interrupted her. The door to the lounge opened. A tall man entered, mid-50s, calm posture, suit tailored but worn. He had no visible ID except the presence of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Dr. Vaughn," he said. "Yes, my name is Morgan Elway, head of crisis communications at Aurelian Airlines." She raised one brow. "Crisis already in my world," he said gently. "A quiet black woman with expertise in digital systems is considered a high-impact variable, especially when she is not spoken publicly." "I wasn't quiet," Celeste replied. "I just didn't perform for them." He nodded, as if that confirmed something he already believed. "I'm here on Rena's request," he said, "not to contain you, but to listen." Celeste leaned back. She had met 100 Morgan Elways in her career, men whose jobs were to decide what version of the truth was most profitable. But this one, he had tired eyes, not lazy, worn, experienced, and he hadn't offered her water, hadn't asked to sit. He knew the weight of the moment. "I sent the report," she said. "They've seen the logs. I read it myself. Just now," he said. "It doesn't read like a hack. It reads like a mirror." "Good," she said. "That was the point." He reached into his blazer and pulled out a sealed envelope. No label, no logo. "This is from Rena. Her handwriting. She believes some things deserve to be analog." Celeste opened it slowly. Inside, a single line handwritten in ink. "You do not have to burn down a plane to reset the flight path." Below it, an offer, a seat on the airline's internal ethics and AI compliance board. Not as a consultant, not as an outside watchdog. A voting seat. Morgan sat now, his knees angled slightly away, posture non-threatening. "She said to tell you this is not a reward," he added. "It is an opening." Celeste stared at the card. "I have declined a lot of chairs," she said, "especially the ones that arrive after someone gets embarrassed." "She believes this one comes before the press wakes up," Morgan replied. "Before the spin cycle begins. She called this your last unfiltered window." Celeste's mind traveled. Not to the flight, not to Jared, not even to the girl in the hoodie. To a day 10 years ago when she stood in front of 3 venture capitalists who asked if she had co-founded NovaTrace with her husband. She had said no. She had said, "I'm the architect. The name on the patent is mine." They had laughed. She wasn't laughing now. Celeste folded the card, slid it back into the envelope, and nodded once. "Tell her I'm considering it," she said, "and that I only build what I'm allowed to question." Morgan stood. "I'll deliver the message exactly as said." He left as quietly as he had entered. The sky outside had turned the color of pewter. Flights rolled across runways like chess pieces. The quiet of this space only made the contrast louder. Celeste finally powered on her phone. One new call. Eli Ramsey. She answered. "You really shook them," he said. "I just moved the curtain." She replied, "Are you going to accept the offer? I'm thinking about it." "Well, if you do, let me help," he said. "I still know how to make systems humble." Celeste chuckled. "No more back doors, Eli, just front-facing transparency." A silence passed between them. Then Eli added, "It's happening, isn't it? You're finally letting yourself be seen." Celeste's eyes glinted at her reflection in the glass. "Maybe," she said, "but only if the cost is not invisibility." When she ended the call, another email blinked onto her screen. Subject Media Inquiry Passenger Interference on Flight 218. Celeste did not open it. She opened her writing app instead. She began typing the draft of her own statement, the one that would beat the headlines to their spin. It began like this. "This is not a story about revenge. It's about what happens when power forgets it was built to protect, not dismiss, and what becomes possible when one person refuses to surrender their seat, their silence, or their signal. She saved it." The file was titled "Before the Press Wakes Up." The press didn't find her that night, not physically, at least, but Celeste knew the digital hunt had already begun. She left the terminal through a side entrance meant for executives and flight crews. A black SUV was waiting, sent not by the airline, but by her own assistant, one of the few people who understood Celeste's rhythms enough to anticipate her without instruction. As the car pulled away from the curb, Celeste removed her shoes, leaned back, and exhaled. This was the breath she had held since boarding that plane. Not because she'd been afraid, but because power often demands stillness until the moment is right. And tonight, it had been. Her phone buzzed gently in her palm. One new message. It was from Maya King. No subject. Just a line of text. "I submitted my resignation tonight." The note said, "I won't work for systems that punish silence differently, depending on who's silent." Celeste smiled. Then came another ping. This one from Rena Calderon. "Board vote confirmed. Your seat is official. We'll need to assign a title for you. Thought you'd like to choose your own." Celeste typed her reply slowly. Title Director of Reformation. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't traditional, but it was honest. The following morning, Celeste walked through the revolving doors of Aurelion's West Coast headquarters, not as a threat, but as part of its future. Her blazer was the same navy one she'd worn on the flight. She had thought about changing, but something in her wanted continuity, a reminder that transformation does not require costume, just courage. Security didn't stop her. In fact, they opened the gate before she even showed her ID. Inside the executive suite, she passed a wall lined with framed portraits, all white, all male. For now, she stepped into the glass-walled boardroom where 12 people sat waiting. Some she recognized. Some tried not to look surprised. Rena stood as Celeste entered. She didn't introduce her. She didn't need to. Every eye in the room already knew who she was. "Shall we begin?" Celeste said, placing her folio on the table and flipping it open. The next 2 hours were not performative. There were no ceremonial welcomes, just audit findings, implementation recommendations, and a new accountability framework, one that rerouted the chain of response in real time. Every scenario was met with 2 questions: who gets heard first and who gets believed fastest. Those questions alone redrew the airline's emergency protocols and service hierarchies. One board member raised a hand. Cautious. "You're suggesting we rewire not just the tech, but the instinct." "Yes," Celeste replied, "because bias isn't a bug in your system. It is your system. I'm here to help dismantle it." There were no further objections. By 11:15 a.m., the room was still not defeated, just thoughtful. Later that day, her statement went live. It bypassed traditional media outlets and was released directly via NovaTrace's digital platform with verified blockchain timestamping. No edits, no spin. The headline was quiet. A passenger's report, "What air feels like when it isn't free." It was shared 2.3 million times in 12 hours. Within 48 hours, 12 airlines worldwide requested consultation with her newly formed Reformation Task Force. By the end of the week, 3 major carriers had begun re-auditing their flight crew training protocols. But the most powerful moment came not from the public. It came from a handwritten letter. It arrived at NovaTrace's office inside a plain envelope. The return address was a juvenile detention center in Georgia. Inside was a note from a 16-year-old girl named Tasha, who had seen Celeste's video shared on TikTok by a teacher. "I didn't know people like you existed. My mom says we're not allowed to fly anymore because of something that happened to her 10 years ago. But if you can get on a plane and change it while sitting in seat 28C, maybe I'll try again someday. Thank you for taking your seat, even if they didn't want you to." Celeste read the letter twice, then again. She folded it slowly and slid it into the inside pocket of her blazer. It stayed there, even when she returned to the air. 1 month later, she boarded another flight. Different city, different crew, but still Aurelian. She had used her booking alias. No advance notice, no fanfare. She sat quietly in seat 1A. A flight attendant approached her. "Can I offer you anything?" "Dr. Vaughn," she asked, without a trace of hesitation. Celeste looked up. The woman wore a gold pin, not a rank, a symbol. It was the new Reformation emblem, a subtle visual cue created to represent trained crew members who had completed the new protocol certification. It meant they were trained not just in customer service, but in humanity. Celeste gave a soft smile. "Yes," she said. "Water would be perfect, and thank you for trusting us again." The woman disappeared down the aisle. Celeste turned to the window. Outside, the runway sparkled with heat mirage. She thought of Maya, of Tasha, of the girl in the hoodie, of all the people who had been quietly erased before her. She didn't fly today for status or statement. She flew to make sure none of them had to raise their voice just to stay seated. As the plane lifted off, Celeste reached into her blazer and touched the folded paper again. The sky ahead was clear, not because it had changed on its own, but because she had made sure it could never forget her signal. When Dr. Celeste Vaughn walked off that plane, she didn't just change seats, she changed the direction of an entire industry. In a world that too often silences people like her, black, brilliant, composed, Celeste didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard. She showed us that dignity isn't given by a boarding pass. It's carried in how we show up, even when the system tries to push us back. But let's be clear, this wasn't just her story. It's ours. It's for every passenger who was told they didn't belong, every child who watched their parent shrink under someone else's comfort, every quiet warrior who chose peace without surrender. Discrimination doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers in gate changes and seat reassignments. But when one woman dared to whisper back with precision, grace, and code, the skies were never the same. If this story moved you, if you believe every seat should be earned, not questioned, and if you're ready for more stories that speak truth with power, like this video, share it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that rise above silence. We're just getting started, and the next story might just be yours.